He made the promise on a Thursday evening. She was in a hospital bed on the 4th floor of Cincinnati General, 17 days out of the surgery that had changed everything. The room smelled like antiseptic and the specific kind of quiet that only exists in hospitals after 8 p.m. when the daytime noise retreats and what's left is the hum of machines and the sound of people trying not to fall apart. He was standing in the doorway with a bag of food she hadn't asked for and wouldn't finish. She was looking at the ceiling. He said, "I'm going to fix it, all of it, by Sunday." She had turned her head slowly, the neck brace made quick movements impossible, and looked at him for a long moment, and she had said, "You can't fix this." And he had said, "I'm not talking about this, I'm talking about everything else." She had not believed him. When Monday came, she cried, not because he'd failed, because he hadn't. Her name was Claire Navarro, 44 years old. CEO of Navarro and Bridges, a regional logistics company headquartered in Columbus, Ohio, that her grandfather had started in 1971 with 2 trucks and a handshake agreement with a local hardware chain. The company now ran 140 trucks, employed 380 people, and moved goods across 11 states. It was not a famous company. It was not the kind of company that made the cover of Forbes or got acquired by a private equity firm and discussed in business school case studies. It was the kind of company that showed up on time with the right freight to the right dock and had been doing that without interruption for 53 years. Claire had been CEO for 7 years. She had not inherited the role the way the word inherited usually works, handed to her because of her last name, because it was expected, because the family needed a face for the letterhead. She had worked every position in the company from the bottom. Summer warehouse worker at 16, dispatcher at 19 while she finished her degree, operations manager at 28 after 3 years learning the root structures from the inside. VP at 35, CEO at 37, when her father had made the decision to step back and trust her with the thing he'd spent his life building. She ran the company the way her grandfather had run the first 2 trucks. You show up, you deliver, you do it right, and you don't make promises you can't keep. She was, by every measure that people used to measure these things, at the height of her career. And then on a Tuesday morning in October, a driver running a red light on I-270 had changed everything. The details are not the point. They never are with accidents. Accidents are not about the details, the specific sequence of steel and velocity and physics that produces an outcome nobody chose. The details are just the mechanism. The point is always what comes after. What came after for Claire Navarro was a spinal cord injury. Incomplete, they told her, a word that in a medical context is not a diminishment but a form of hope. Incomplete means not total. Incomplete means the signals between her brain and her body were disrupted, not severed. Incomplete meant the possibility of recovery, of rehabilitation, of a future that was different from the one she'd planned but was still a future. What it meant at day 17 in Cincinnati General was that she could not move her legs, she could feel them. That was what incomplete meant in practice, the maddening specific cruelty of feeling without movement. Her legs were present, warm hers, they simply did not respond to what she asked of them. She was working with 2 physical therapists, a rehabilitation specialist and a neurologist who was careful and honest and told her, some people recover significantly from this type of injury, some people recover partially. The first 6 months will tell us most of what we need to know. 6. She had a company to run. She had a daughter, Maya, 15 years old, who had been brought to the hospital by Claire's sister the night of the accident and who had held her mother's hand for 3 hours without crying, because Maya was her mother's daughter and her mother's daughter did not fall apart. She had a board that was managing its concern in the particular way boards manage concern, through careful emails, and a temporary operating committee that was doing its best and was not her. She had 17 days of hospital ceiling and a bag of food she wouldn't finish. And she had a man standing in her doorway who had just made a promise he had no business making. His name was Frank Calder, 53 years old, 6 feet even, built like someone who had worked with his hands for 30 years and hadn't stopped, grey at the temples, dark everywhere else. He had a face that looked like it had been outdoors most of its life, weathered in a way that was more competent than it was old. He was a contractor, not a general contractor in the corporate sense, not the kind who ran a crew of 40 and managed $1 million commercial builds. Frank Calder was the kind of contractor who did the work himself. Roofing, framing, electrical, plumbing. He had licenses in all of them. He'd gotten them one by one over 20 years because he'd decided early on that he wasn't going to subcontract anything he couldn't do himself. He had a crew of 4, sometimes 5, depending on the job. He was the best contractor in the 3-county area. He was also chronically the hardest to schedule. Not because he was in demand, though he was, because he was a single father. His son was named Owen, 14 years old. Quiet where his father was steady, careful where his father was quick, and building in the way of 14-year-olds who haven't yet been told what they're good at, an understanding of himself that was not quite finished but was clearly going to be something. Frank's wife had left when Owen was 6. The leaving had been mutual in the way that some leavings are mutual, both people arriving at the same door from different directions. She lived in Portland now, which was a recurring geography in these stories, and she called on birthdays and was present in a way that was honest about its limits. Frank had raised Owen in a house in Westerville, 3 bedrooms, one of which he'd converted into a workshop. The backyard he'd fenced himself. The deck he'd built the summer Owen turned 8 and which Owen had helped with in the way of 8-year-olds helping, enthusiastically and not always usefully and in a way that Frank had found more satisfying than doing it alone. He was not a man who needed to be important. He was a man who needed to do things right. Claire Navarro had hired Frank Calder 2 years before the accident. The company's Columbus headquarters needed significant renovations. The building was 30 years old, the electrical system was outdated, the loading dock had structural issues that had been flagged 3 times in safety inspections and addressed with temporary fixes rather than proper repairs. Claire had gotten 3 bids. Frank's was not the lowest and not the highest. She'd hired him because of a conversation she'd had with the project manager at a distribution facility in Springfield who'd used Frank the year before. What was he like? Claire had asked. He finished on time, the project manager said. 3 weeks ahead of schedule actually, came in under budget, and when he found something we hadn't specified, a section of subfloor under the east loading area that was compromised, he fixed it and told us about it afterward. Didn't upcharge. Just fixed it, why didn't he upcharge? Claire asked. I asked him that, he said it needed to be fixed. He'd already found it, seemed wasteful not to. Claire had hired him, the renovation had taken 4 months. She'd spoken to Frank directly a handful of times, the kind of conversations that happen between a CEO and a contractor on a building project. Progress updates, a decision about the loading dock configuration, once a disagreement about the timeline for the electrical panel work that had been resolved cleanly and without drama. She had come to a clear conclusion about Frank Calder in the course of those 4 months. He was the kind of person who did what he said he would do. Not more, not less. Exactly that, reliably and without requiring management. She had respected that. She had not thought about him much beyond the project. And then 17 days after the accident, he had appeared in her hospital doorway. He'd heard about the accident through the industry network, the informal web of contractors, project managers, and facilities people who worked in commercial buildings across the Columbus area and who passed information the way people in close-knit industries always do, quickly and without ceremony. He had sent a card, the kind of thing you do. And then a week after the card, he'd heard something through the same network that had stopped him. The company's headquarters, the building he'd renovated 2 years ago, had a problem. A section of the roof over the main operations center had been showing signs of failure for 3 months. A patch repair had been done in August. The patch had held through September. But the October rains had exposed what the patch had covered. The underlying decking was compromised over a 400-square-foot section. If it wasn't addressed before the first hard freeze, which in Columbus typically came in late October or early November, the damage would accelerate through winter and potentially become a structural issue by spring. He had submitted a bid through the company's facilities coordinator in September. The facilities coordinator, a good man named Phil, competent in the ordinary range of things, had been managing the situation the way facilities coordinators manage situations when the CEO is in the hospital and the temporary operating committee is handling 8 other crises. He was prioritizing what was urgent and deferring what was only important. The roof was important. It was not yet urgent. Frank understood the distinction. He also understood that the gap between important and urgent with roofing was the gap between a repair and a disaster. He had driven to the hospital not to drum up business. He had more work than he could manage. He had driven to the hospital because he had built something in that building, his work was in that roof, and he needed the person who could make the decision to make it. He had brought food because you don't walk into a hospital room empty-handed. He had not intended to make a promise. He'd intended to explain the roof situation, answer whatever questions she had, and leave her with the information she needed to authorize the repair. But when he'd walked into the room and seen her, Claire Navarro, who had run a 380-person company with the specific quality of confidence that comes from knowing exactly what you're doing, lying in that bed with the neck brace and the ceiling and the silence, something had shifted in the room. She turned her head to look at him. She'd said, Frank Calder, not a question. The roof, she said. Yes. Phil sent me the assessment. I've been meaning to authorize it. I know that's not why I'm here. She had waited. He had looked around the room at the get well cards on the windowsill, at the tablet on the bedside table with what he could see from the door was a stack of company emails, at the physical therapy schedule taped to the wall, at all the evidence of a life that had been interrupted mid-sentence. He had not planned what he said next. What needs to be done, he said, for the company? What's been piling up? She had looked at him. That's not your problem, she said. I know, he said. What needs to be done? A long pause. She had told him. Not everything. She'd been too tired and too careful for everything. But the roof, the loading dock lighting that had been malfunctioning for 6 weeks, the HVAC system in the driver break room that had been running at 60% capacity since August, the security camera system on the east side of the building that had 3 dead zones nobody had fixed, the maintenance backlog that had accumulated because Phil was good at managing and not trained for trades decisions. She talked for 20 minutes. He had listened the way he always listened, completely without interrupting, with the quality of attention that made people feel their words were landing somewhere rather than dissipating into air. When she finished, he had said, I'm going to fix it, all of it, by Sunday. She had told him he couldn't. He had told her he wasn't talking about the injury. She hadn't believed him. He had gone home, called his crew, and started planning. In part 2, 4 days, 4 men, and everything that was broken. What Frank found in the building that nobody had told Claire about. And the moment Owen showed up on Saturday with a tool belt, Thursday night, he sat at his kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen and wrote down everything she'd told him. The roof, the loading dock lights, the HVAC, the security cameras. He added what he knew from his own assessment, the things he'd seen in the building 2 years ago that had been on the edge of manageable and were now 2 years further on, somewhere past that edge. He counted the items, 17. He looked at them for a while. He had 4 days, 4 men including himself, and a son who had a soccer game on Saturday morning that Frank was not going to miss. He picked up his phone. He called his crew, 4 men. Frank Calder, 53, licensed in 6 trades. Has not taken a vacation since 2019, not because he can't afford one, but because he is the kind of man who finds it difficult to leave things unfinished, and there are always things unfinished. Darnell Jackson, 47, Frank's longest tenured employee, 12 years, electrical and HVAC, the kind of worker who does not need to be told a second time. His wife taught 4th grade in Westerville. He coached youth basketball on Tuesday nights and took the job seriously in a way that Frank respected. Ray Kowalski, 59, roofing specialist, the oldest of the crew, the most skeptical, the most frequently right. He had a bad right knee from a fall in 2017 that he managed with the specific stoicism of a man who considers complaining a form of waste. Marcus Webb, 31, the youngest. Plumbing and framing with an eye for structural issues that Frank had been watching develop for 3 years. Quiet, did not rush, had a daughter in kindergarten who he talked about with the unpretentious warmth of someone who had not yet learned to be self-conscious about how much he loved being a father. Frank called all 3 at 8 p.m. on Thursday. He explained the situation. Darnell said, "We're not getting paid for this, are we?" Frank said, "I'll cover your rates, it's coming out of the bid." Darnell said, "I meant, are we going to charge her?" Frank said, "Parts cost, labor I'll handle." A pause. Darnell said, "I'll be there at 6. Ray said, "My knee's going to hate that roof." Frank said, "Your knee hates everything." Ray said, "Fair, 6 a.m. Marcus said, "I've got Emma Sunday night, I can do Friday and Saturday." Frank said, "Saturday I need you all day." Marcus said, "I'll figure it out." They started on the roof at 6:15 Friday morning. Ray had done the original assessment in September and knew what he was looking for. Frank had the materials. He'd ordered them Thursday night, called in a favor with a supplier in Dublin who owed him one, had everything delivered by 5:30 a.m. The compromise section was larger than the September assessment had indicated. Ray pulled back the existing patch and they stood looking at it in the grey October morning, the decking soft in 2 places, the membrane separation running about 60 feet further than the report had specified, the flashing along the parapet wall showing signs of failure that were going to make themselves known in a bad way come January. "It's worse," Ray said. "Yes," Frank said. "The patch held it through September." "Yes, nothing held it through October." "No," they looked at it. "We can do it," Ray said. "It's going to be the whole day and half of tomorrow." "Then that's what it is," Frank said. They worked, Frank and Ray on the roof. Darnell below managing materials, troubleshooting the loading dock electrical system in the intervals when the roof work required 2 people and 1 was possible. Marcus in the driver break room, pulling the HVAC unit apart with the specific calm of someone who has seen worse. At noon, Frank came down from the roof and walked the building. He was looking for what he'd expected. He found more. The loading dock lighting was worse than the operations report had described. Not just malfunctioning, 2 of the 8 dock bay lights were out completely, and the fixture on Dock Bay 5 had a wiring issue that had been creating a ground fault in the circuit since at least September. Phil had been managing around it. The drivers had been managing around it, backing into dark bays, relying on their truck lights, making the work slower and less safe than it needed to be. Frank fixed it himself. It took 90 minutes. It needed to have been fixed in September. He walked the east wall exterior. The security camera dead zones were 3 cameras with alignment issues. 1 mount had been improperly reinstalled after the August patchwork. 2 others had been nudged out of position by the roofing crew. He reset all 3, recalibrated the fields, tested them with Phil's app on his phone. And then in the southwest corner of the warehouse floor, he found something nobody had told Claire about. The southwest corner of the warehouse floor, approximately 800 square feet of concrete slab, was showing signs of subsidence. Not collapse, not failure. But the slab had settled unevenly, creating a grade differential of about 3/4 of an inch over 20 feet. In a warehouse floor, this matters. Forklifts running that section were compensating. He could see the tire wear patterns, the slightly adjusted routes the drivers were taking without thinking about it. 3/4 of an inch sounds small. On a loaded forklift traveling at operating speed, it is not small. He had the slab professionally checked. He knew what he was looking at from the surface, but concrete subsidence can be cosmetic or it can be pointing to something underneath, and you don't make assumptions about what's underneath. He called a foundation specialist he knew, a man named Greg who owed him a favor of an entirely different kind, and Greg came out Friday afternoon. The news was not catastrophic. The subsidence was surface level. A section of the vapor barrier under the slab had failed, allowing minor moisture infiltration that had settled the aggregate in that section. The repair was a mudjacking job and a joint sealant application, not cheap, not fast, but not structural. Frank authorized the repair. He used his own account. He would deal with the billing afterward. He went back to the roof. Owen's soccer game was at 9 a.m. Frank was there. He'd left the site at 8:15, driven to Westerville High School's North Field, watched his son play 60 minutes of soccer in the specific way of a father who is fully present in a body that is physically tired, and driven back to the site at 11. Owen was in the passenger seat. "Dad, yes, I'm coming. You've got homework. I'll do it Sunday." "Owen, I know the building. I helped with the renovation." A pause. "And you look like you need someone who can do the stuff that doesn't require a license." Frank had looked at the road. "Your mother would." "Mom's in Portland," Owen said. "I'm here." Frank had driven to the site. Owen worked. He was 14 and he worked the way his father worked, with the specific economy of someone who has been shown how to do something properly and understood why proper mattered. He carried materials, he prepped surfaces, he held things while Frank fastened them. He handed tools with the anticipatory quality of someone who was watching what came next rather than waiting to be asked. At 3 p.m., Marcus looked at Owen over a section of subflooring they were reinforcing near the loading area. "Your dad teach you all this?" Owen looked up. "Most of it." "How old were you when you started?" Owen thought about it. "I don't remember not knowing it," he said. Marcus had smiled and gone back to work. Frank nearby had heard all of it. He had said nothing. By Saturday night, the accounting was roof complete. The full section replaced, new membrane, parapet flashing corrected. Ray had done what he said he would do on a knee that had hated every minute of it and not slowed him down. Loading dock lighting complete, all 8 bay lights operational. The ground fault resolved. HVAC in the driver break room complete. Darnell had replaced the failing compressor component and recalibrated the system. The room would be properly heated and cooled for the first time since August. Security cameras complete. Floor subsidence repair scheduled for Monday. The mudjacking crew was booked. It would be done by noon. That left 2 items from Claire's list: a water heater in the second floor break room that had been running intermittently, and a door seal on the cold storage unit in the east warehouse that had been letting cold air escape and raising the cooling costs. Frank fixed the water heater himself on Saturday night. It took 40 minutes. It was a heating element. He'd replaced 1,000 of them. The door seal took 20 minutes on Sunday morning. By Sunday at noon he was done. He drove home. He showered. He sat at the kitchen table with the legal pad. He crossed off 17 items, all 17. Then he picked up his phone and called the hospital. In part 3, what happens Monday morning? What Claire finds when she finally sees the report. And the thing Frank did that she hadn't asked for, hadn't expected, and didn't know how to answer. He had called the hospital on Sunday at noon. He'd asked for her room. She'd answered on the 3rd ring, which meant she was awake and had been awake for a while. He'd said, "It's Frank, I finished." A long pause. "All of it," she said. "All of it." Another pause, longer. "The roof, done. The loading dock, all 17 items," he said, "plus 3 we found that weren't on the list. The floor subsidence repair is Monday morning. They'll be done by noon." Silence. He had waited. She said, "Frank." He said, "Yes." She said, "I need to tell you something." He said, "Okay." She said, "I don't know how to," and then she stopped. He waited again. He was good at waiting. She said, "Thank you." He said, "You're welcome." He had hung up. He had made dinner. He had helped Owen with the history homework that had indeed been deferred to Sunday. He had gone to bed at 10 p.m. Monday morning, when Phil sent Claire the completed facilities report with Frank's itemized work summary attached, she had cried. She had cried for 11 minutes, alone in her hospital room, looking at a document. Then she had stopped because she was Claire Navarro and 11 minutes was enough, and she had started making calls. The report was 4 pages. Phil had compiled it from Frank's notes. Frank had documented everything because he always documented everything, because documentation was part of doing the work right. Each item had a before description, the repair performed, the materials used, the time taken, and a brief note on expected service life. The roof section, full replacement of 640 SQFT decking and membrane, parapet flashing corrected on north and east runs. Expected service life, 18-22 years with standard maintenance. The loading dock lighting, all 8 bay fixtures restored to full operation. Ground fault on dock 5 circuit resolved. Previous workaround partial darkness eliminated. Safety incident risk reduced. The HVAC unit compressor component replaced. System recalibrated to full capacity. Driver break room now operating at rated temperature range. Estimated energy savings from corrected efficiency approx. $180 month. The security cameras, 3 units realigned. Dead zones eliminated. Coverage restored to original specification. And then on page 3, the item that made her stop, Southwest Warehouse floor, approximately 800 SQFT, subsidence noted and assessed, foundation specialist consulted 1018. Cause vapor barrier failure, minor moisture infiltration. Remediation, mudjacking and joint sealant. Repair completed 10/21 Monday. No structural compromise. Note, existing forklift traffic patterns suggest drivers had self-corrected routing to accommodate grade differential operational impact ongoing. Recommend normalizing routes post-repair. Safety implication of uncorrected differential moderate was not on original deficiency list included in scope as identified during inspection. She read that paragraph 3 times. The floor had been a safety issue, an unreported one. The drivers had been compensating for it without being told to, which meant without being told why, which meant without any formal acknowledgement of a risk that existed and was affecting their daily work. Frank had found it, assessed it, brought in a specialist and fixed it, without being asked, without charging extra, without telling her until the report was complete. She thought about the specific trust embedded in that sequence of decisions. She cried. The first call was to Phil. "I need to understand the floor situation," she said. "When did you know about it?" Phil was quiet for a moment. "There was a note from one of the senior drivers in August," he said. "Marcus, one of the dock supervisors, he'd noticed the grade change. He put it in the maintenance log. And it went into the queue," Phil said. "I was managing the roof and the HVAC and the electrical panel work, and I assessed it as lower priority. I should have flagged it to you." "Yes," she said. Not angrily, clearly. "I'm sorry, Claire." "I know," she said. "I'm not calling to assign blame. I'm calling because I need to understand what I've been missing while I've been in here. Is there more?" A pause. "There's a list," Phil said carefully. "Send it to me." "Claire, send it." She spent the next 2 hours reading the maintenance log that had accumulated since her accident, not catastrophes, manageable things mostly. But the pattern of it, the deferred decisions, the minor issues stacking into moderate ones, the specific way that an organization runs on its own momentum for a while and then begins to coast, was visible in the log the way it's visible in the month before a company's first big failure. She had been managing the company's strategy from a hospital bed. She had not been managing the building. The building was the company. She had not understood until now that this was something she needed to understand. She called him at 2 p.m. He answered on the second ring. "The floor," she said. "Yes." The drivers were rerouting around it. "Yes, Marcus had flagged it in August. I found the maintenance log note when I did the inspection," he said. "That's how I knew where to look." She was quiet. "You didn't tell me about it Thursday night." "I didn't know about it Thursday night," he said. "I found it Friday. I handled it without telling me." "You were in the hospital," he said. "There was nothing for you to decide. I found it, I assessed it, I got it fixed. The decision was mine to make. It wasn't your building. It was my work," he said. 2 years ago I built those loading systems. That floor is in the section where we did the dock reinforcement. I wanted to make sure the reinforcement held." She absorbed that, and it held fine, he said. "The issue was in the original vapor barrier, which was spec'd by the developer in 1989. Nothing we touched." "But you checked." "I always check," he said. She was quiet for a long time. "What do I owe you?" she said. "Parts cost," he said. "I'll send the invoice." "Frank, the labor your crew was paid their rates," he said. "From my account. I'll invoice the materials separately." "That's not Claire," she stopped. "You run a good company," he said. "The people who work for you are doing their jobs carefully in a building that needed someone to pay attention to it. That's not a complicated situation. Let me send you the materials invoice." She looked at the ceiling, the hospital ceiling, the one she'd been looking at for 3 weeks. "Why?" she said. "Why what? Why did you come? Why did you make that promise? You don't owe me anything." He was quiet for a moment. "My work is in that building," he said. "If it's failing, that's my concern." "That's not all of it." A pause. "No," he said. "It's not." She waited. "You run your company the way I run my crew," he said. "Right? Without shortcuts, with real attention to the people who make it work." A pause. "I've worked with enough people who don't do it that way to know how rare it is." She absorbed this. And you're in a hospital bed and the building was starting to coast," he said. "Someone had to pay attention." She held that. "The invoice," she said finally. "I'll send it Monday." "Frank, yes, thank you." She paused. "All of it, not just the building." "You're welcome," he said. He hung up. She set the phone down. She picked up her rehabilitation schedule from the bedside table and looked at it for a long time. Then she put it down and picked up her laptop. She had a company to run. There was one thing that wasn't in the report. Frank had not documented it because it was not a building repair. On Friday evening, while Darnell was finishing the loading dock electrical work and Ray was cleaning up the roof materials, Frank had found something in the break room, not a maintenance issue. A collection. On the counter beside the coffee maker, a small, handwritten card taped to a mason jar. The card said, "For Claire and Maya from the crew." The jar had $340 in it. He had stood in front of it for a moment, then he had gone back to work. On Sunday morning, before he left the building, he had added $200 of his own to the jar and sealed it. He had left a note with Phil. "Give this to whoever is managing Claire's personal logistics. Not as a work thing, just from the people here." He had not put his name on the note. Phil had understood. Maya Navarro was 15 years old and had the specific self-possession of a teenager who has been required by circumstances to grow up faster than she'd planned. She was not brittle about it. Some kids, faced with a parent's serious injury, develop a brittleness, a surface tension, a held breath quality, the permanent readiness for the next thing to go wrong. Maya had gone the other direction. She had gotten quieter, more internal, more observant. She had taken on the household logistics with the focused competence of someone who was managing something she hadn't been trained for, and had decided that the absence of training was not a reason not to do it well. She cooked, she managed the dog. She kept the house in the state her mother would want to come home to. She visited the hospital every day after school. She did not, in the hospital, cry. She cried at home in her room with the specific privacy that teenagers protect like a territory. Her aunt, Claire's sister Renata, who had moved into the house for the duration, knew this and left the privacy intact. There is a time for comfort and a time for the dignity of feeling something without being witnessed, and Renata, who was a perceptive woman, knew the difference. On the Monday after Frank finished the building, Claire had called Renata, not about the building, about Maya. "How is she really?" Claire asked. Renata was quiet for a moment. She's managing, Renata said. She's a pause. She's you. She's doing all the right things and she's holding everything in a container that's going to need emptying at some point. Claire was quiet. I need to come home, she said. The doctors said 4 more weeks minimum. I know what the doctors said. A pause. I'm going to work on it. She hung up and called her rehabilitation specialist. She had a conversation that was frank and direct, and that resulted in an accelerated rehabilitation plan that her specialist agreed to, contingently, because Claire Navarro was the kind of patient who makes things happen by the specific force of her clarity about what she needed and why. She had a daughter at home who needed her mother. That was a reason that moved things. While Frank was sending the materials invoice, Claire was building a case, not for litigation she had no claim to pursue. The driver who'd run the light had no assets. The case was legally a closed equation. The case she was building was different. It was the case for what came next. She had, in the 3 weeks of the hospital ceiling, done something that CEOs in hospital beds don't always do, she had thought. Not about the company's strategy, not about market positioning, not about the operational metrics that normally occupied her working hours. She had thought about what the company was and why it mattered and what the accident had shown her about both. What it had shown her was a gap, not a bad gap, not evidence of failure or neglect, evidence of something more specific, the gap between a company that is well run and a company that knows why it's running. Her grandfather had known why. He told her when she was 12 years old and working her first summer in the warehouse, we're in the business of keeping promises, not logistics. Promises. When someone gives us their freight, they're trusting us. That trust is the product. The truck is just how we deliver it. She had run the company on that principle in the abstract. She had not, she was beginning to understand, been close enough to it lately. The building had been coasting. The floor had settled and nobody had told her. The drivers had been routing around a hazard without anyone formally acknowledging the hazard. That was a company that had started to operate on momentum rather than attention. Frank Calder had shown her what attention looked like, in 4 days and 17 items, and a jar with $340 in it that she'd heard about from Phil on Monday afternoon with a note that had no name on it but that she knew without needing to be told was his. In part 4, Claire's full story, the grandfather who built with 2 trucks, the father who trusted her with it. What the accident cost her that nobody talks about, and why Frank Calder's promise was the first promise in 6 months that she'd been given she could count on. There are 2 kinds of loss in an injury like this. The kind everyone can see, the wheelchair in the corner, the physical therapy schedule on the wall, the specific and terrible gap between what your body was last Tuesday and what it is today. And the kind nobody talks about, the meeting you can't run, the warehouse floor you can't walk, the moment when a driver comes to you with a problem and you can see in their face that they're managing their response to you, being careful with you in a way they never had to be before. The second kind is in some ways harder. Claire Navarro had been dealing with both for 6 weeks. She had not talked to anyone about the second kind. She was about to. Her grandfather's name was Ernesto. He had come to the United States in 1959 from Guadalajara at 21 years old with $200, a cousin's address in Columbus, and a practical approach to adversity that had been bequeathed to him by a father who'd managed a farm through 3 bad droughts and emerged from each one knowing what he could do without. He had worked for 12 years before the trucks. Restaurants, factory floors, a steel fabrication plant in Reynoldsburg, where he'd spent 5 winters learning every position on the line and been promoted to floor supervisor in 1968, which was not nothing in 1968 for a man who'd come to the country with $200 and a cousin's address. He'd saved. He'd found in 1971 a hardware chain in central Ohio that was growing faster than its distribution network could keep up with, and he'd had a conversation with the owner, a direct conversation, the kind he was known for that had resulted in a handshake agreement. Ernesto would deliver their freight from the Columbus warehouse to 6 stores in the region reliably for a per-delivery rate that was lower than the chain's current contractor. He'd had 1 truck. He'd bought the second with the profits from the first 6 months. He'd named the company Navarro Logistics, which later became Navarro and Bridges when his partner, a man named James Bridges who'd met Ernesto on the factory floor and followed him out of it, had come aboard in 1974. James Bridges had died in 1998. His family's stake had been bought out gradually, the last shares in 2010. The name had stayed, because names, Ernesto had said, are promises. And you don't break a promise just because the person who witnessed it is gone. Roberto Navarro had been Ernesto's only son. He had grown up in the company the way children grow up in family businesses, thoroughly and not always willingly. He had driven routes in high school. He had worked the warehouse in college. He had rebelled in his 20s by going to law school, which had been the specific rebellion of a son who wants to be his own person and ends up becoming someone his father admires for different reasons. He had practiced corporate law for 8 years. He had then come back to the company not because Ernesto had asked, but because he'd arrived in his early 30s at the understanding that the thing he'd grown up inside was actually extraordinary. He had returned with a lawyer's eye for contract and liability, which had been exactly what the company needed at the scale it had reached. He'd become CEO in 1995 when Ernesto had stepped back. He'd run it for 15 years. He and Claire had a relationship that was built on mutual respect in the specific way of people who speak the same professional language. He'd been direct with her from the beginning. When she came back to the company at 28, he'd told her, "You learn every job or you won't run this company. Not because I require it, because the company requires it." She had learned every job. He had retired at 62 in 2012 and moved to Tucson with Claire's mother. He called every Sunday. He knew the operations metrics by heart and sometimes asked questions in the calls that were sharper than she'd expected, and she was always glad of them. After the accident, the calls had changed. He called every day. He asked about her recovery. He did not ask about the company, which was more telling than any question he could have asked. She had called him on Monday after the report from Frank. "I need you to tell me something," she said. "Anything. When you were running it," she said. "Were there times when you felt like you were managing it rather than knowing it?" A long pause. "Every year after the first 5, he said. "What did you do about it?" "I walked the floors," he said, "not to check on people, just to be there, to not be the person behind the door at the end of the hall." "I've been the person behind the door." "I know," he said. "I've been watching." She was quiet. "The accident," she started, "is not a verdict," he said firmly. "It's an interruption. What matters is what you do with the interruption." She thought about that. "Dad," she said, "I think I've been running the company with my head." "Yes," he said, instead of, "Your grandfather ran it with his hands," her father said. "I ran it with my eyes. You've been running it with your head. That's not wrong. It's a third of what's needed." She absorbed that. "What did you learn from Grandpa Ernesto that you never told me?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "Many things," he said. "But the most important one," a pause. "He used to say the building tells the truth about a company, not the balance sheet. The building, walk the building honestly and it will show you who you are." She thought about Frank. Frank had walked her building. He had walked it honestly. It had shown him everything. The rehabilitation specialist's name was Dr. Amara Ose. She was 41, precise, warm in the specific way of clinicians who have learned to hold both the science and the person at the same time. She had been working with Claire for 4 weeks. On a Wednesday afternoon in week 5, Dr. Ose had asked a question that was not about physical therapy. "How are you doing with the professional part?" she asked. Claire looked at her. "Define the professional part." "The loss of being the person in the room who moves the fastest," Dr. Ose said. "The loss of being the one who can go anywhere in a building at any time without it being an event." Claire was quiet. "I'm managing it," she said. "I know you are," Dr. Ose said. "I'm asking how you're doing with it." The difference between managing and doing. Claire had been thinking about this in the hospital ceiling sense for weeks. She had not talked about it. She talked about it now. She talked about the board meeting she'd run by video call, the way she'd seen her CFO and her COO look at each other during a moment of silence, the look of two people calibrating unconsciously how much to defer, how much to manage around, how much to hold back from the person in the video window. She talked about the moment Phil had sent the maintenance log, and she'd understood that it had not been sent earlier, not because Phil was negligent, but because Phil had been protecting her. From the weight of it, from one more thing, people start protecting you, she said, and they mean well, they genuinely mean well, but what they're actually doing is deciding what you can handle, and once people start deciding what you can handle, you've lost something. Dr. Ose looked at her. "What have you lost?" "Authority," Claire said. "Not formal authority, I'm still the CEO, but the other kind, the kind that comes from being fully present, from not being managed." She paused. "Frank Calder didn't protect me," she said. "He told me what was wrong, he fixed it. He treated me like I was capable of receiving the information and making a decision about it, even from a hospital bed." A pause. "That was..." She stopped. "What?" Dr. Ose asked quietly. "It was the first time in 6 weeks that someone treated me like myself," Claire said. She looked at the window. "I didn't know how much I needed that until it happened." Owen had been thinking about it since Saturday. He and his father were in the kitchen Sunday night, Frank making the pasta he made every Sunday, Owen ostensibly doing his history homework at the table and actually thinking about the building. "Dad," he said. "Yes." "Why did we do that?" Frank looked up from the stove. "The building. We spent the whole weekend. Ray's knee was bad. Marcus had Emma. They came anyway." "What?" Frank considered the question seriously, which was what he always did when Owen asked something serious. "Because the work was there," he said, "and we were the people who could do it." Owen was quiet. "That's not a whole answer," Owen said. Frank looked at him. "No," he said, "it's not." He turned back to the stove. "Ms. Navarro runs her company the way I run this crew. She takes the work seriously. She takes the people seriously. She doesn't cut corners." "How do you know that?" "I worked in her building for 4 months. I saw how she ran it." "But she's the CEO. You were the contractor." "Yes." "You probably didn't even know who you were." "She knew who I was," Frank said. "She talked to her project manager. She talked to me directly when decisions needed to be made. She came to the site 3 times. A pause. "She asked me once why I'd fixed a section of subfloor that wasn't in the scope." "What did you say?" "I said it needed fixing." "What did she say?" Frank was quiet for a moment. "She said, put it on the invoice. We pay for what we get." And I said I already had a call. "And she said," he paused, "she said, that's not how this works. And she had her accountant send me a check for the full rate." Owen was quiet. "So you owe her," Owen said. Frank looked at him. "She paid for what she received." Frank said, "I don't owe her anything." "Then why?" "Because she's the kind of person you show up for," Frank said. "Not because you owe them, because it's right, because the world works better when people like that don't fall through the cracks." Owen thought about that for a long time. "I want to be that kind of person," Owen said finally. Frank looked at his son. "I know," he said. "You already are." He went back to the pasta. Owen went back to his homework. In the last 2 weeks of her hospital stay, Claire built a document, not a strategic plan, not an operational framework, a different kind of document. She called it privately the building list. It was a record of everything she wanted to know about her own company that she had not, before the accident, known. Not the financials, she knew those. Not the strategy, she knew that. The texture. The actual operational experience of the 380 people whose daily work constituted the company. She started building it by asking questions. She called drivers, not through her assistant, directly. She got the phone list from Phil, and she called drivers whose names she recognized and some she didn't, and she asked them about their routes, about the equipment, about the docks they found difficult, and the clients who were a pleasure, and the run that nobody wanted on Tuesday mornings, and why. She called warehouse staff. She called dispatch supervisors. She called the woman who had managed the company's safety compliance program for 11 years and who had, Claire realized with some discomfort, never once been in a meeting with Claire directly. They talked for 40 minutes. The safety compliance manager's name was Brenda. She had 3 suggestions for process improvements that she'd been holding for 2 years, waiting for the right moment to raise them. Why didn't you bring them to me before? Claire asked. A pause. You were always moving, Brenda said. Claire held that. I'm not moving now, she said. Tell me. She wrote everything down. She had, by the end of the second week, 6 pages of the building list. It was the most useful document she'd produced in 3 years of running the company. In part 5, she comes home. What Maya says to her on the first night. What Frank finds on his doorstep on a Tuesday. And the beginning of a conversation that neither of them expected to have. She came home on a Thursday. Not the Thursday she'd hoped for, 2 weeks later than the accelerated timeline she'd negotiated with Dr. Osei. The nerve function in her left leg had shown unexpected improvement in week 7, which was good, but it had also prompted a recalibration of the rehabilitation protocol that meant 4 more days of intensive inpatient work before they'd let her go. She had spent those 4 days being furious about them in the internal, contained way she spent most of her emotions. Then she'd done the work, then she'd come home. Maya had been standing on the porch, not waiting, she hadn't known the exact time. She'd just been there when the car pulled up, the way teenagers sometimes arrive at the right moment through no visible logic, standing on the porch in a hoodie with her arms crossed, not from cold or attitude, but from the specific bodily containment of someone who has been holding something very carefully for a very long time. She had looked at her mother in the passenger seat. Her mother had looked back at her. And Maya, who had not in 7 weeks of this let herself fall apart, had walked down the porch steps, opened the car door and put her arms around her mother carefully with the new physical awareness of someone who has learned what her mother's body now required, and she had cried. She cried for a long time. Claire held her daughter and said nothing and let it happen. That was the right thing to do. She had gotten good in 7 weeks at knowing the right thing to do. Renata had made dinner. The kind of dinner that is also an act of care, not elaborate, not performative, but exactly right for the occasion. Chicken soup, fresh bread, the kind of food that tastes like someone thought about what you needed before they started cooking. They ate at the kitchen table, Claire, Maya, Renata, and it was ordinary in the specific way that ordinary things are miraculous when they've been interrupted. The dog sat beside Claire's chair the whole meal and did not move. After dinner, after Renata had cleaned up and gone to bed early in the way of people who are giving space without calling it that, Maya sat across from her mother at the kitchen table. They had talked in the hospital. Every day, real conversations, not managed ones, but this was the first one at home, at the table, in the kitchen that smelled like their life. I kept the spider plant alive, Maya said. Claire looked at the counter. The spider plant that she had historically been the only person in the house capable of keeping alive. You watered it. I watched a video, Maya said. Claire smiled. A pause. Mom, Maya said. Yes. Are you going to be okay? The directness of it, not how are you or how's the recovery, but are you going to be okay, was so purely Maya that Claire felt it in her chest. Yes, she said. It's going to take time. It's going to be hard, but yes. Maya nodded. How much time? The doctors say 6 months to a year before we know what the recovery looks like, what we're working with. And then we know what we're working with. Maya was quiet. I looked it up, she said. Incomplete spinal cord injuries. I figured you did. The range is really wide. Yes, some people recover almost completely. Yes, some people, yes, Claire said gently. The range is wide. Maya looked at her. I want you to be in the good part of the range, she said. I know, Claire said. I'm working on it. I know you are. A pause. You work on everything. Claire looked at her daughter. Who taught you that? She said. Maya almost smiled. Grandpa says it's Grandma Navarro, she said. He says you got her way of solving things. Grandpa Roberto says that all the time. Claire thought about what her father had said on the phone. Your grandfather ran it with his hands. I ran it with my eyes. You've been running it with your head. I think, Claire said slowly, that I'm trying to add something to that. What? Something your great-grandfather had, Claire said. He ran it with, she thought about the right word, with his whole self, not just his head, the whole thing. Maya considered this. Like feeling it, she said. Like being in it, Claire said. Actually in it, not managing it from above. Is that what the accident did? Put you back in it? Claire looked at her daughter, 15 years old. Yes, she said. I think that's exactly what it did. Frank found it when he got home from a job in Gahanna at 6 p.m. on a Tuesday. A sealed envelope tucked in the frame of his front door. His name on the front in handwriting he didn't recognize. He opened it at the kitchen table. The letter was 3 pages handwritten on plain white paper. The handwriting was compact and precise, the handwriting of someone who has learned to make their letters small because they have a lot to say. Frank, I want to tell you what that weekend meant. Not what it accomplished. I've read the report. I know what it accomplished, and I'll come back to that. What it meant. I had been in that hospital for 6 weeks when you walked in. 6 weeks of being managed by nurses, by doctors, by my board, by my team, by people who loved me and were trying to protect me. All of it well-intentioned, all of it making me smaller. You walked in and treated me like myself. You asked what needed to be done. You listened, you went and did it. You found things I didn't know about and fixed those too, and you told me about them in a report rather than a conversation designed to spare my feelings. I cannot tell you what it meant to be given accurate information about my own building by someone who trusted me to receive it. I know you said the work was in your building. I know you said it was your concern because you built it. I believe you. I also know that's not all of it, and I wanted you to know that I know that. You showed my people what it looks like when someone takes a thing seriously. Not as a performance, as a practice. My drivers have been talking about it, Phil told me. The crew watched 4 men spend a weekend fixing everything that had been deferred without complaint, without ceremony, without asking for anything. That is not nothing. People carry that. It changes what they think is possible. The floor subsidence, the thing you found that wasn't on any list. I've been thinking about that more than anything else in the report. A risk existed. My people had quietly adjusted to it. Nobody had formally acknowledged it because nobody wanted to add one more thing to the pile, and you found it and fixed it and put it in the report like it was simply the next item. I'm going to run my company differently when I come back, not because of the accident was just a circumstance, because of what you showed me. The building tells the truth. Walk it honestly, fix what you find. My grandfather used to say that. You proved it. I'm going to ask you something that you don't have to answer yes to. When I come back, I'm targeting the beginning of December. I'd like you to walk the building with me, not as a contractor doing an assessment, as someone who knows it. I want to see it through your eyes. If that's not something you'd be comfortable with, I understand completely. The request comes with no obligation attached to the weekend or the invoice or anything else, but I think I'd learn something from it that I couldn't learn any other way. Claire Navarro, P.S. Tell Owen thank you. Phil told me a teenager showed up on Saturday and worked all day without being asked. That kid is going to be something. Frank read the letter twice. He set it on the table. He started making dinner. He thought about it while he cooked. He thought about it through dinner and the dishes and the evening. At 9 p.m. after Owen had gone to bed, he sat at the kitchen table with the letter and a pen. He wrote back, Claire, yes, December whenever works. Call Phil and tell him I'll need a full building access day, not a 2-hour walkthrough. A full day, morning to whenever, what you said about accurate information. I've been thinking about that since I read your letter. The reason I gave you the report the way I did, all of it, the floor, the cameras, everything, is because that's how I was taught to give information. My father was a carpenter. He said the second worst thing you can do on a job is hide what you find. The first worst is not look. You looked. You were in a hospital bed and you looked. That's why I made the promise. Owen says you're welcome. He also asked if he could come in December. I told him that was up to you. He's 14 and he knows the building better than he should, having spent a weekend in it. He'll stay out of the way if there's nothing useful he can do. There usually is. I'm glad you're home. Frankie sealed the envelope. He drove to her house in Bexley. He left it in the mailbox. He drove home. He went to sleep. In the weeks between the letters and December, several things happened. Claire began her outpatient rehabilitation, 3 sessions a week mornings with Dr. Osei's team. The left leg continued its slow and non-linear progress. The right leg was more complicated. She managed the company from the study in the Bexley house, which she had converted into a functional office with the help of Renata and Maya, and a facilities person from the company who had driven over on a Saturday and spent 6 hours making the room properly accessible. She ran the first all-hands meeting by video in November, not a board meeting, a company-wide meeting. Every driver who could access a video link, every warehouse worker on the morning and afternoon shifts, every dispatcher and dock supervisor. She had talked for 20 minutes. She had told them what she'd learned in the hospital, not the injury, the other thing, the building list. What she'd heard in her calls to drivers and safety managers and dispatch supervisors who'd been waiting for someone to ask. She had said, I have been running this company with my head. I want to run it with all of it. That means I need to hear from you in a different way than I have been. Starting now. She had opened the call for questions. The first question came from a driver in Dayton named Luther, who had been with the company for 19 years and who had, in all those years, never once spoken directly to the CEO. Luther asked about the route reconfiguration that had been piloted in the southwest region the previous quarter. He said it was saving time but creating a problem at one specific dock in Cincinnati where the new arrival windows conflicted with the dock's existing booking system. Claire had not known about this conflict. She'd asked Luther to stay on after the call. She'd taken 3 pages of notes. She'd called Phil the next morning. The dock booking conflict was resolved in 2 weeks. Luther had sent Phil an email that Phil forwarded to Claire. Haven't seen a problem get fixed that fast since George Caldwell's first year. Thought you should know. Claire had read it 3 times, then she'd added it to the building list, which was now 12 pages. It happened by accident. Frank had come to the Bexley house 2 weeks before the scheduled December walkthrough, a building supply question he needed to discuss with Claire about the specifications for a minor repair she'd authorized at the East warehouse. Owen was in the truck. Maya was on the porch. The The meeting lasted 4 minutes, during which Owen and Maya discovered they attended schools in adjacent districts, had both read the same obscure science fiction novel for reasons neither of them could entirely explain, and disagreed strenuously about the ending of said novel. They did not exchange contact information. They both thought about the conversation on the drive home or on the porch, respectively. Claire watched the 4 minutes through the window and said nothing. Frank, in the truck pulling away, said, "That went fast." Owen was looking straight ahead. "She's read The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet," Owen said. "Is that notable?" "Nobody our age has read it," Owen said. "She said the ending was earned. I said it was rushed." "Who's right?" Owen thought about it. "I might be wrong," he said. Frank said nothing. He was smiling, though. In Part 6, the December walkthrough. What Frank shows Claire that nobody has shown a CEO before. What Owen does. And the thing Claire says at the end of the day, standing in the bay of Dock 5, that Frank didn't expect. She had asked him to walk the building with her. She had not understood when she asked what that meant from a wheelchair. She understood it now. It meant going through every entrance, every corridor, every dock bay and break room and warehouse floor and stairwell landing that she had walked 100 times without noticing. And noticing this time what she'd missed. Not because the building had changed, because she had. They started at the loading dock. Not because the loading dock was where you started a building tour, the lobby was where you started a building tour. But the loading dock was where the work started, where the company actually happened in the physical sense, where Ernesto Navarro's 2 trucks had become 140 trucks and 380 people and 53 years of a kept promise. Frank stood at the dock's edge. Claire was in the manual wheelchair she was using for longer distances. The powered chair was for home. The manual chair was for places where she needed to feel what she was moving through. Renata had offered to come. Maya had offered to come. Phil had offered to come. She had brought Frank. Owen was somewhere in the building. He'd gone ahead to the warehouse floor, which he remembered from the weekend and which had apparently captured something in him that needed revisiting. "Tell me what you see," she said. Frank looked at the dock. "Bay 1 through 3 are in good shape," he said. "The new LED fixtures have evened out the light. Before you had pools, bright in the center, shadowed at the edges where drivers were backing in. Safety issue. Ongoing, fixed now." He paused. "Bay 4, the dock plate, the leveling mechanism has a slight binding on the left side, not failing, but watch for it." She wrote it down. "The weather seal on Bay 6 is starting to separate at the top corner," he said. "You'll get cold air infiltration by January if it's not addressed." She wrote it down. "The paint on the floor markings is wearing. The pedestrian safety lane on the south side. The contrast is reducing. OSHA minimum is high visibility. This is getting to the edge." She wrote it down. He went through the dock in 11 minutes, 6 items. She had walked this dock 100 times. She had noticed none of them. "Why don't I see this?" she said. He looked at her. "You're looking at the operation," he said. "The trucks, the movement, the logistics. I'm looking at the structure. I should be doing both." "You run a logistics company," he said. "You have a facilities team for the structure." "My facilities team doesn't walk the dock," she said. "Phil walks the dock. Phil walks it with a checklist," she said. "That's not the same thing as looking." He was quiet for a moment. "No," he said, "it's not." "Show me how to look," she said. He did. They spent an hour in the warehouse. Owen was there in conversation with a forklift mechanic named Harold who had been with the company for 22 years. They were discussing, as far as Claire could tell from across the floor, the maintenance schedule for the electric forklifts, specifically a battery charging issue on 2 of the units that Harold had been troubleshooting for 3 weeks. Owen was asking questions. Harold was answering them with the specific generosity of someone who is pleased to be asked. Frank watched this and said nothing. Claire watched it and said, "How long has Owen been interested in electrical systems?" "Since he could hold a screwdriver," Frank said. "He's thinking about electrical engineering." "He should talk to Marcus Webb," Claire said. The man who worked on the HVAC with your crew the weekend. He's at Darnell's firm now." "Yes." "He's 20 years younger than Harold," Claire said. "Owen's generation. He might be a useful connection." Frank looked at her. "I'll mention it," he said. She'd known from the first minute she met Owen Calder in her doorway at the hospital. No, from the phone call with Phil about the teenager who'd shown up Saturday, what kind of kid he was. The kind that Harold was happy to talk to, the kind that asked questions because he actually wanted the answers. She knew that kind. She'd been that kind. "Your son is going to be exceptional," she said. Frank was quiet for a moment. "He's going to be himself," he said. "Which is better?" She looked at him. "Yes," she said, "that is better." The driver break room was warm. The HVAC Darnell had repaired was working at full capacity for the first time since August. The room was, as a result, the temperature a room should be in December, an unremarkable thing that was, for the drivers who used it, actually remarkable. 3 drivers were in the room when they came in. One of them, a man in his 40s named James, with a route in the northeast corridor, had been with the company for 14 years. He looked at Claire. He had the same recalibrating expression Marcus Dell had worn in the Cincinnati building, the expression of someone adjusting an assumption. "Miss Navarro," he said. "James," she said, "I've been meaning to call you. I talked to dispatch last month about the Columbus-Youngstown route. You had some thoughts about the new sequencing." James looked at her. "I did," he said, "but how did you know about that?" "I put it in the monthly driver feedback form." "I've been reading the driver feedback form," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. All of them, she said, "for the last 6 weeks." A pause. "We thought nobody read those," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm sorry about that. Talk to me about the sequencing." They talked for 15 minutes. Frank stood by the door and listened. He watched Claire Navarro stop being the CEO who managed from above and become the person who knew what she was running. The shift was visible in her posture, in the quality of her listening, in the specific way James's voice changed when he understood he was being heard rather than processed. He thought about what she'd said in the letter. I want to see it through your eyes. She was seeing it now, through her own eyes, the ones she'd always had. The ones she'd been moving too fast to use. At 3 p.m. they came back to the loading dock. The afternoon shift had started. The dock was moving, trucks backing in, dock plates descending, freight rolling. The specific orchestrated noise of a working logistics operation. She asked to go to Bay 5. The bay where 2 months ago a ground fault in the circuit had been creating unsafe conditions that the team had been managing around. She stopped at the edge of Bay 5. The lights above it were working. The circuit was clean. The dock plate descended smoothly when the button was pressed. Luther told me the drivers knew, she said. They knew something was wrong with the circuit. How did they know? The lights flickered when certain equipment was running nearby. They'd started routing some of the heavy equipment differently to reduce the load, informally. Nobody had documented it. The same way they rerouted around the floor in the warehouse. Yes, she looked at the bay. My people were quietly solving problems I didn't know about. They were making the company work despite the gaps, and I was letting them carry that without even acknowledging it. Frank was quiet. That's what organizations do, he said. People solve problems at the lowest level they can because the alternative is waiting for someone above them to notice. And if someone above them never notices, then they keep solving, he said, until something is too big to solve quietly. And then you have a different problem. She held that. Did I ever have something that was too big to solve quietly? He thought about the floor. The floor was getting there, he said. Give it another 6 months and it would have been a forklift incident rather than a maintenance repair. She looked at Dock 5. And you found it. I was looking for it, he said. That's the difference. She was quiet for a long time. The dock noise continued around them, backing trucks, diesel smell, the percussion of freight work, the specific music of a company that shows up every day and keeps its promise. My grandfather, she said, used to walk the dock every morning before anyone else arrived. He said he was taking the temperature of the day. Smart man. He knew every driver by name, every dock worker. She paused. By the time my father ran it, the company was 3 times the size. He couldn't know everyone. He knew the managers. And you? She looked at him. I knew the metrics, she said. He didn't say anything. I'm going to change that, she said. It wasn't a plan or a resolution. It was a statement of fact. In the same register she used to tell him the building needed work. I know, he said. How do you know? Because you've been changing it since September, he said. The driver calls, the safety compliance manager, the feedback forms, the all-hands meeting. He paused. You didn't need to walk this building to decide to do it. You were already doing it. She looked at him. Then why did I need to walk it? He was quiet for a moment. Because, he said, some things you have to feel, not just know, and you've been doing a lot of knowing and not enough feeling. She held that for a long time. The dock noise settled around them. Bay 5 lit and clean and working. Frank, she said, yes. I want to make you an offer. He waited. I want Calder Construction to be the company's primary facilities contractor, not a bid process, a retainer, monthly maintenance assessment, priority response, annual full building inspection. He was quiet. That's significant work. Yes, it's also what the building needs, someone who looks at it the way you look at it. I'm a small operation. I'm not looking for large, she said. I'm looking for right. He was quiet for a long time. Owen's thinking about electrical engineering, he said. I know a long-term relationship with a company like this would be, he paused. I thought it might be, she said, if he wanted to do summers formally, not just showing up on Saturday with a tool belt. He looked at her, she looked back. I'll think about it, he said. That's all I'm asking. They finished at 5:30. Owen came back from whatever corner of the building he'd disappeared to. He'd been with Harold, and then with the East Warehouse floor crew, all of whom had been happy to talk to a 14-year-old who asked better questions than most adults. The 4 of them, Claire, Frank, Owen, and Phil, who had joined for the last hour, stood in the lobby. The building was quieting down, the late afternoon shift settling into its rhythm. The lobby was simple, functional, well-maintained, the kind of lobby that says this is a company that works without saying anything about wanting to impress you. Claire looked around it. She had walked through this lobby 100 times without really looking at it. She looked at it now. On the wall beside the building directory, someone had put a framed photograph. She had noticed it before without registering it. She registered it now. It was a black and white photograph, clearly old. A man in work clothes standing beside a truck, an older truck, the kind that existed in 1971. He was smiling at the camera with the unguarded pleasure of someone who has just done a thing they're proud of. Her grandfather. She hadn't put that photograph there. She didn't know who had. She looked at Phil. Who put that up? She said. Phil looked at it. It's always been there, he said, since before I started. I never noticed it. I know, Phil said quietly. I figured you'd see it when you were ready. She looked at the photograph for a long time. Ernesto Navarro, 1971, one truck, a promise. She thought about what her father had said. He ran it with his hands. She looked at her hands in her lap. They would do. They were her hands. They were her grandfather's hands and her father's, and they were hers. Owen, she said. He looked at her. Harold said you knew what was wrong with the battery charging system on the electric forklifts. Owen looked slightly startled. He said that. He told Phil. Phil told me. She smiled slightly. What was it? Owen thought for a second. The charging cable housings on 2 of the units have hairline cracks from wear. When the ambient temperature drops, which it does on the dock overnight, the housing contracts and the connection becomes intermittent. They need new housings. It's not the battery and it's not the charger. Silence. Phil wrote it down. Claire looked at Frank. Frank was looking at his son. His expression was the one that George Caldwell had photographed in a children's room in Cincinnati, the one that had no name but that was recognizable to anyone who'd ever seen a person be exactly what they came to be. He caught Claire watching him. She didn't look away. "He's going to be something," she said quietly. Frank looked at the photograph of Ernesto Navarro on the wall. "He already is," he said. He had made a promise on a Thursday evening that a man with a crew of 4 could fix everything that was broken in a company's building over a weekend and have it done by Sunday. She had told him he couldn't. He had, not because he was extraordinary, because the work was there and he was the person who could do it, and doing it right was the only way he knew how to do anything. On a December afternoon, she rolled, technically in a manual wheelchair that she was already using less than she had been, through the building that her grandfather had built with 2 trucks and a promise. She saw it the way Frank had taught her to see it, not from above, not through metrics and reports and the comfortable distance of management, from inside it, from the loading dock to the break room to the warehouse floor to Dock Bay 5, lit and clean and working. She was not the same CEO who had been in that hospital bed in October. She was something older, something her grandfather would have recognized. Some promises look like repairs, some repairs look like someone paying attention. And some forms of paying attention, the kind that finds the thing nobody told you about, fixes it without fanfare and puts it in the report like it's simply the next item, are indistinguishable from a certain angle from love. He had promised to fix everything by Sunday. She had cried when Monday came, not because he'd failed, because she had never, in all her years of running the company her grandfather built, understood until that moment what it meant to have someone keep their word. She understood it now. She was going to carry it forward. That was the whole idea, the end.